I'm going to start perhaps just by very briefly telling you a little bit about myself, because I think it's important. I'm not a traditional academic, and for those of you who don't know me, I think it's important background, because some of what I've done comes from the work I've sort of done in policy. And so a lot of my work has been in energy, about 20 years now, and much of that has been in the policy space. And that's where I learned the trade, if you will, of communicating complex topics for an expert audience, or as well as journalists, politicians, regulators, and the general public. So a lot of what I'm going to present is not just based on sort of academic research and trying to communicate that, but really my experiences working in policy, working with think tanks, with the World Economic Forum, etc. I'm not going to go through the detail here, but it's important that you bear that in mind, that I have that policy background, I think, when you hear me talk about social media. But that's enough about myself. I start with a bit of a provocation, perhaps. So when I sort of talked about social media with colleagues in the past, they often tell me this: social media is a complete waste of time. Like, why would you want to spend any time on that? I'd much rather do research, or I do technical analysis or something, or whatever your priority is. Why waste time on social media? Or if I want someone to read my paper, I just email it to them. Like, why tell the world that you have a new paper out? I just email it to the people you want to read it. That's another statement I've heard many, many times. Here's another one. Social media feels like shouting in the void. There's lots of people that might give you attention, but really, what's it all for? You're not going to get anything back. That's a sort of perception there. And then some people say, well, it's all about narcissism, isn't it? You just want to kind of get likes and feel great because you get these notifications, usually in red, and you see 30 plus notifications last night. Dopamine rush going through your body, sort of thing. But that I don't want to do that. That's the sort of sentiment there. And finally, I just don't have the energy for the online drama. All the people falling out over things, all the trolling, all the negativity, all the sort of self-centeredness. So I don't want to engage in any of that. And some of you might feel exactly the same, and you might feel like I agree with many of these statements. Okay. What I try to do is to persuade you that you should ignore those, and that there is definitely a space in social media that is positive and productive and impactful. And that's what I'm going to do in the next few minutes in my talk. So why social media? First, some stats. Then I want to talk about my own journey a little bit, give you some examples, concrete examples, not abstract ones, but very specific examples where I have seen social media do great things for me personally, but also for people I worked with. And then finally draw some lessons, so more at an abstract level. If you started and you wanted to use social media, how would you do it? What are the sort of tools that you should have? And that's the plan for the talk. So I hope that's fairly clear. And at the end, I want to leave ample time for any questions or comments. You might have none, you might have many, but I just want to make sure we have that time. So it's not going to be a 45-minute lecture, I'm afraid. I'm going to share my experience and keep it fairly brief, and then I want to just open it up to the room. But first, some stats. So why social media? Well, quite simply, about 2/3 of the world's population is on social media. And when you think about where that is concentrated, you might argue in the UK, for example, where we're all based, the percentage is even higher. And just for that reason, I would say it really matters. If 2/3 of the population is on social media, the likelihood is that the people you want to actually reach with your research and you want to influence and have impact on will be on social media, at least many of them, maybe not all of them. And those numbers are growing, as you can see here, every year. So social media is just a very important platform for communicating. And online in general, I mean, even for this talk, there's more people joining online than we have in the room. I haven't seen the last numbers, but I think it's probably double the people are online than the people in the room. The second stat I wanted to share with you is just where people are using social media, which platforms are they using? And it's quite surprising, actually. YouTube is leading by quite a big margin. Facebook is still in there. I don't know how many of you still use Facebook. I certainly don't, but there's still a lot of people on Facebook, and Instagram, TikTok, I would have expected. LinkedIn, which is my preferred platform, and I will explain later why that is the case, sort of ranking in the middle. And actually, Twitter, what used to be X now, not that many, and Blue Sky is not even listed here because it's too small a platform to feature in this list of the top platform for social media. Again, it's important context. I'm not saying you should engage on all of these platforms because they're very different platforms for their very different purposes. But the numbers, I think, are important to bear in mind, and just knowing who you engage with will be very different on different platforms. So if you engage on TikTok or Instagram, the demographics will be completely different to LinkedIn. Or if you engage on Reddit, you have a very different audience compared to YouTube. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I think it's important to bear that in mind. There's been a big change recently. You all remember this guy, right? Actually, the platform Twitter was probably the most important social media platform in science, for academia in the world. I say that because a lot of the people who are highly influential in academia work on Twitter, shared papers. In climate, Michael Mann, for example, they have a huge following, or Catherine Hayhoe, people who have a huge following, hundreds of thousands of people were on Twitter. But also in my space, in the energy space, it was a great place to get information, to keep up with what's the latest in the industry, what's the latest research, what's happening in policy. So Twitter was really important. And since this man arrived, it's become fairly useless. I'm still on it, but I ask myself every day why I am still on it. But it's become a fairly useless platform. So things are changing. Those numbers are not just big numbers. I think it's also the quality of the conversation that needs to be considered when we look at social media. And I want to spend a bit of time to talk about my own journey. And I'm afraid it might sound a bit like bragging, but because I will show you some numbers that go up over time, but it is about how to build an audience. So I have to do that, otherwise it's a bit pointless, really. So I talk about my own beginnings first, which are very humble. So I started my first look at this, my LinkedIn account in 2007, when I was just finishing my master's degree in London, and I wanted to basically connect with people for job hunting. I wanted to message people and see what was going on. It was just for that purpose. And I had a handful of people who I was connected with for my master's program, perhaps. And it took me years to have more than 500 connections there. And Twitter, I started in 2012, mainly to read the news, what's going on. I was not engaging very much at all. I had a very modest audience of maybe 100 people or something after months and months of posting. And that hasn't really changed much. In the early sort of 2010s, my following wasn't really growing at any meaningful rate. And I have some numbers for that in a minute. And I made lots of mistakes. I was posting content nobody engaged with. And it's like, it's so interesting. Why is nobody engaging with the fact that I just tweeted about my latest paper, which I published in Energy Policy, or that there's a new blog post on the ECI's website. And I now understand why. But at the time, I just couldn't understand why content that I found interesting, other people just would not engage with at all. So I made lots of mistakes. I also made lots of mistakes by arguing with people who I should have ignored, but I'll come back to that later on. However, since then, things have changed quite dramatically for me. And here's some numbers for my following. I said a few hundred people to begin with. And you see my X account has started to really take off about 2019, perhaps 2020. And it's still, I think it's 41.5 thousand followers now. You can see the dip, right? You can see that line is tailing off, and that's the Musk effect because people left the platform, and it's certainly not growing at the same rate, and I'm not engaging that much there anymore as well. But the main, I think the main platform now for me is LinkedIn. And you can see similar pattern here, but it's delayed. And why this big rise in 2022 on LinkedIn? Well, actually Elon Musk again, because all the people who used to use LinkedIn, Twitter, suddenly realized we need another platform. And Blue Sky was kind of emerging, but wasn't quite ready yet. They were only doing invitation-only signups at the beginning. And LinkedIn was the alternative platform. And I would still say today, for anyone who asks me which platform should I pick, that's the #1 platform I would suggest you pick. Blue Sky is great. It's a very friendly crowd, but it's a bit of a bubble, I would say. You get less controversy, less negativity, but there's also a lot less people there. And it's a lot harder to cut through with content because there's just not that many people there. LinkedIn is brilliant. You can get a lot of people engaged with your content there because they are using the platform now much more actively. And I think the term lurker I use that deliberately because someone who has an account is just looking at stuff. There's a lot of people who just do that, including people who actually you might want to reach out to, right? And they might never engage, they might never say anything because they might be a public servant, a civil servant. They might be working for a company and they are not allowed to say anything publicly, but they're all hanging out there trying to look at content that they might find interesting. And finally, Blue Sky didn't exist until very recently. As I said, it was invitation only for a while. That has taken off quite a bit as well, especially after I think Elon Musk supported Trump in the US election. We've seen a massive swell of people going to Blue Sky. I would say if you have time to have two platforms, Blue Sky is a good alternative to X. It's a much better alternative to X. But I would prioritize LinkedIn simply because of the following, as I said. But Blue Sky is definitely a platform that is, so far for me, very, very useful indeed. The other thing that happened after these numbers really went up, and I think it's a bit of a positive feedback loop, once you get to a certain critical mass, you start to get some recognition from organizations that essentially rank influencers in the world of social media. And this is what happened to me. First in 2019, I think in April, completely unexpected. I didn't have a lot of followers at that point on X. You can see it here. It was quite modest, less than 5,000 people. But at that point, Analytica, which is one of those global influencer ranking platforms, and they basically connect companies that want to pay people to create content for them with influencers, with creators, and they rank people, and you can buy these rankings, but they also publish brief versions of that. And that was ranked number 22, which in the world, which was, I was like, what's going on here? Alongside people like Al Gore, I think, was on the list, of Fatih Birol and Michael Liebreich, people who were kind of big names in energy, and also outside of energy, of course, to some extent. And after that, then following goes up again a bit more because people see that, and then when they join Twitter, they would look at those kinds of lists. And then LinkedIn, they have a program called Top Voices, where I don't know exactly how they select people, but I think every year 300 people are awarded the Top Voice badge, and then you can keep that if you continue to deliver interesting content. And the algorithm propels that on the platform. Don't ask me how it works exactly, but you basically get a boost in the algorithm if you have that badge. And this was for Top Voices Green, which is basically people who are working on environmental stuff. And I think they had 10 people selected in that category that year. And then 2022, there was another ranking where I was, I think, the number 5 thought leader on energy transitions by another platform. And 2023, again, Analytica on sustainability, and 2024, most read thought leader in the world of energy transitions. And just this week, actually, I was named the number 13 top LinkedIn influencer in the UK. Yeah, all of this is just noise, but of course, it also is useful as a platform to communicate. It's not very, it doesn't mean anything, right? It's just an algorithm, and you have lots of engagement. But I just wanted to illustrate how, from a very modest following, I think this feedback loop of then getting some of that recognition leads to more following, leads to more recognition. And I want to talk a bit about examples of impact, because I think that's more important than my own following or any external recognition, to really illustrate and hopefully demonstrate why you might want to look at social media again, if you haven't already used it. The first one is you get to actually speak at pretty interesting events if you have people following you who like your content. Here's 2 examples. On the left-hand side, this is in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and I use this for a very particular reason. So this was a conference on high-temperature heat pumps. I don't know, many of you will know what that is exactly, but it was big machines that produce high-temperature heat, their heat pumps in industry. I was not an authority on high temperature heat pumps, but I had started to look into this and done basically background reading and posted stuff on LinkedIn or and I think it was still Twitter, X at the time, I think it was X already, saying this is a really interesting research area. Here's some interesting research I found in this journal, or here's a good report, here's some stats. And then I got an invitation, come and give the keynote talk at this conference. There's 400 people who are high temperature heat pump geeks, and they were all geeking out on high temperature heat pumps. I couldn't understand half of what they were talking about because it was very engineering focused and all about this technology. But I got to give the keynote presentation simply because of my LinkedIn posts. I asked afterwards, how did you find me? I was LinkedIn. On the right-hand side, this is another version of that happened last year on district heating. Again, it's not a topic where I've done lots of work on. That's why I picked this example. It's not a topic where, Jan works on this topic. He's not. It was a fairly new topic for me. And I gave an evening talk, the inspirational keynote to open the conference in Brussels for the Euro Heat and Power Business Association, which is the trade body for district heating bodies. So that's one example. You get invitations to conferences. Some of them are academic, some of them are more technical, more industry, some of them are policy, but I keep getting most of my invitations through social media because people see content and say, that looks really interesting. Can you talk about that at this conference? And they also make a judgment if they see how you present content. They make a judgment, oh, is that a good speaker for this audience? Will they be clear in how they communicate? Will their content be engaging and interesting? So it's definitely a way of getting speaking invitations. Of course, you can have a whole discussion whether you want speaking invitations in the first place, why that's important. But of course, that is part of also a research career, right? Is to get that recognition and impact becomes more and more important. So speaking engagements really matter. Let me now use an example where I worked with a colleague of mine and sort of mentored him from an early social media post to a paper in a top journal that we published. So on the left-hand side, you see my former colleagues, still colleague actually, I'm still working with him, Duncan Gibb, who has done a Twitter thread to start with about heat pumps as well again, and basically there were lots of people on social media saying they don't work when it's cold. When it's really cold, they just don't work and they're useless. So I talked to Duncan and said, well, why don't we do a proper meta review of all the field studies, all the data we can find around the world? And he did a thread. We had like 15 or 20 field studies from the top labs in the world, NREL in the US, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. And he did, in great detail, explained what these studies had found. And then after seeing there was a lot of traction, I said to Duncan, why don't we turn this into a paper? You've done the work already. You've all the data. You've done all the literature review. This would be a great meta study. And we just sent an email to the editor of Joule and said, look, we had this Twitter engagement. Lots of people found it interesting. There's definitely, there's a research gap. No one has published it quite this way. What do you think? And he said, well, that sounds great. And the article was published. And then afterwards, we use social media to say, look, there's a new article on this really interesting subject. And you see some of the media coverage on the right. There were hundreds of articles from Canada, the US, coverage in Switzerland, in the UK. It was all over the world. And the result from this very humble Twitter thread that he created was essentially a paper that was, I think, retweeted at some point by the Secretary of State for Energy in Canada. I think Catherine McKenna, I think was her name. I'm not sure she's no longer in post. I don't think she is. And also, we had a famous actor. His name escapes me now, who retweeted it for some reason. But you can just see how the story kind of unfolds from a very modest contribution to the debate to some serious academic research that then ends up really changing the debate about a subject in the media and reaches policymakers. And in the aftermath, I could even go further. We had then people reach out to us and say, this is really interesting. Can you present your findings? Or they use it as evidence in regulatory proceedings. Or they think we could do some follow-up research. So it's just an example to kind of demonstrate the power of You're testing ideas and refining them rather than waiting until you have the final product and then go out into the world. Okay, third example. This is again for me. Very simple post on LinkedIn, which got, I think, 450,000 views, that's a lot. Just to put it into perspective, that is a lot of views. That's rare. I don't get that very often. Maybe once or twice a year you get that kind of attention. If you're on LinkedIn, you know that more than 2,000 engagements is a lot. If you're not there, it is a lot. It's hard to get more than 200 or 300. More than 1,000 is very good, and more than 2,000 is usually exceptional if it's something about energy, and especially as geeky as what I've posted here. A Sankey diagram about waste heat, but basically, Dieter Juul-Jorgensen, who is the commissioner, the European Commission for Energy. She saw that, and what she did after she saw that, she asked her team, really, 2/3 of our energy is wasted because of inefficiencies? Why is no one working on that? And she tasked her team to look into this. And why is that important? Well, clearly, this was at the time when Europe was in a lot of turmoil because of the energy crisis, and when we get away from Russian gas, they kind of put efficiency front and center of the discussion. And certainly at the very top of the commission. So just using that as an example to illustrate how you can really influence, I think, the perception of a certain topic if you get it right and people pay attention to what you're saying. In this case, it worked. Most of the time, it doesn't work. I'm telling you the good stories here. Of course, there's a lot of trial and error behind this. Here's another one I think that's interesting for research, which is more. I guess an ideation exercise. This was for a paper I was writing about the barriers to industrial electrification. I don't have to explain exactly what that is. It doesn't matter. But effectively, what I was doing is trying to create a literature review, but also work with practitioners and get their input. Like, what's missing? Have we missed anything? And we got 63 people commenting on it, and then following up with emails. Basically, it was a very useful exercise to collect the best available evidence beyond what you find on Web of Science or Google Scholar or Scopus, because people will say, "That's just a report; it's just come out. You should see this." And you get a lot of input that way from the very people who are very close to what you study. So I use it often, even with half-baked ideas. What do you think? Is this worth looking at? Is this an interesting question? Or if you had this question, how would you tackle it? What's the best way to do it? That's, I think, is another really nice way to engage with people, where you're not just telling them, "Oh, look how great I am, I've just published this paper," but you're actually making them part of a conversation, and that makes it much more interesting and engaging, and you invite them into the conversation. And then a final example here is about a very recent paper which I'm currently writing on, where I was looking for co-authors. So I had a clear idea of what I wanted to write. This is with Nick Eyre, who I think is online, actually. And in this case, what I was missing was, I didn't have a critical piece for the analysis, which is someone who can create complex Sankey diagrams, which is a way of depicting the energy system globally, and to then modify these Sankey diagrams. Yes, there might be people at Oxford who could do it, but I didn't know anyone. I couldn't see any publications of somebody who had. And just put this out there, and within a few hours, I had several people who were offering help and support, some of who will end up as co-authors on the paper now. It's just another way of connecting with people. You may say, "Well, I already know everybody in that field," but in this case, I didn't. I really didn't know everybody who was working on it. It was extremely helpful. I want to talk about some lessons learned now, and kind of go to a level higher again, away from the specific examples and my own experience. And there's a graphic I want to share, which I think summarizes quite a lot of it neatly in sort of 6 key tips. I think one is to establish your niche. There's a lot of people who talk about all sorts of things, but it's not clear what they stand for. And it's a bit like, I guess, if you're an academic who publishes on every single topic, that's great. But if people think, who should I invite to this conference, or who should I co-author with, they might not think of you because you're kind of a jack of all trades. So same on social media. I think if you need to have some sort of brand, right? What is the area that you're working on? and what's your unique position within that area. I think that really helps to have that clear. I mean, unless you're just happy to share all sorts of things about your cat and your the latest workout at the gym or what you had for lunch. But I guess you've come here not because you want to learn how to use social media for personal use and sharing your life, but actually for professional use. So I think being clear about your niche is important. And it goes in some instances, it goes into quite some niches where people just produce data sets on a certain issue. So there's one guy who tracks the sales of electric cars around the world, and he plots S-curves and he predicts when will 50% penetration be reached. But he's become a real authority in that space because he's so specialized, and people really now engage with his content for that reason. So there's different ways of how you can do that. Optimizing your social media profile. I mean, there's so many people with no profile picture. I think like, really? Or no summary. What are they actually about? Or the summary is again unclear. So there's a lot you can do by just having a good profile that people can understand. What are you about? What is your work on? Why should I engage with you? I mean, if I don't usually connect with people with no profile picture or detail on their profile, because why would I? I don't know who they are. Why should I connect with them? They could be, they could just be bots. There could be people who might be unpleasant. So it's much more personal, I think, if you have a clear profile. Knowing your target audience, that's tricky actually, because you could talk to the general public, which is totally different than talking to fellow academics or experts. I do a bit of both, and it depends really on what I post. And over the years, I've become more confident in talking to the general public about things through the media, with interviews with journalists, but also on social media. But I think there's definitely a space for being clear. Look, I'm just going to talk to a research audience. I don't want to engage with these bigger debates and the wider public, because that's not what I want to be doing, either because I don't feel comfortable or I'm not good at that, and that's fine. And I think number 4 is so important, to create valuable content. I mean, the number of times I see people just sharing a newspaper article where the post is automatically provided. When you go on an article in The Guardian or Financial Times and you say share on LinkedIn, it provides an automated post, right? That's the worst way to share content, because it's nothing personal. There's nothing in there that is about you. It's just, you just click the button and people see that, and it doesn't get any traction at all because there's nothing interesting about doing that. So creating valuable content that I think is unique in a way and is your perspective, adds something to the conversation. Post regularly. I think having one great post every 2 months doesn't build an audience. You need to be on it, and that doesn't mean you need to post every day and several times. But I would say 3 good posts a week wouldn't be too bad, and it's not so much of a time commitment. If you can manage, get yourself to do it on a Monday and a Wednesday and a Friday, spend a bit of time, post something thoughtful on LinkedIn. It's not a big time commitment, and you might actually see that you find content just when you do your work, right? When you write a paper, you prepare for a presentation, you do a literature review. Often that's how I get my ideas. I read something really interesting, that's worth sharing, that's worth pointing out, or somebody published a report, really interesting stuff. I want people to learn about that and give them my take on it. And then finally, be authentic. I think it's fine to make mistakes and to speak with your own voice. I think you need to find your voice, and you will make mistakes. But I think AI-generated content, I'd be careful with that. I mean, I use it to assist me sometimes to edit content, especially when you have a long text and you compress this. But I always edit it and use my own words. But what doesn't work, I think, is, oh, ChatGPT, write me a post on this new report, and then it has all the emojis and the subheadings where they're all caps. And he's like, yeah, you just put that into ChatGPT. And the worst example of that is somebody who was called the Science Police. That was their name on LinkedIn. It's very strange. Basically, in a critique of one of my papers, had a very long comment. And then somebody said, that's exactly what I get back from ChatGPT if I say, write a critique about this post. So you've just used AI and you claim you're the Science Police. Like, I blocked that person because I don't want to talk to ChatGPT generating responses. It's a waste of my time. Like, I can do that if I want to. I can go on ChatGPT and have a discussion, an argument, but not with someone who is a person and just use that. Okay, maybe just I have 2 more slides and I'm done. On how to grow your following. I think because that is difficult. It's easy once you have a certain to just keep growing, right? Because once you reach critical mass, it's almost unstoppable. You know, the algorithm just helps you so much in doing that. But especially when you start out, I think it's I already said, identify a space that you reach. That's really important. Be clear, and then connect with peers in that space. You will find that there are not that many people who are great content creators in any given area. Connect with those people. I think that's the first step, I would say. It doesn't matter whether you connect with 400 people who are kind of just there in the background. I think if you have 5 people who are great, and you can then see what they do, how they do it, and ideally engage with them, that will lead to much more of a following, because they get the traction already. Right? They already have the visibility. People already look at what they're doing. And if you can connect, that's much more powerful than you kind of going after individual connections, I'd say. And learn from that. I mean, it's a skill. It's not something you can just read a textbook on or listen to my talk and then you're great at social media. It's a skill that you need to learn. It's like learning how to play an instrument. And if you can see people who do this well and observe, it's a really powerful way to take a shortcut. You see what content works. How do they do it? What am I comfortable with? Some content might work because it's controversial, because it's particularly off-putting for people. That's not what I want to generate. What does good content look like that actually gets traction? And how can I maybe recreate some of that in my own words? And then finally, I think I already mentioned posting consistently and learn what works, supporting others. Because so much of social media is about self-centeredness and promotion, self-promotion, and LinkedIn in particular can be terrible at that. People are like, oh look, I've been at this talk and I've gotten this award and this certificate, and it's tiresome. And most people don't really want to see that. It's okay to do a bit of that. I sometimes do that, but I think it depends how you do it. If you've given a talk at a conference, right, just saying, oh look at me, I've just given a talk and look at all these people, look, listen to me. It's a bit boring, right? It's just like, well, yeah, the only reason why you posted that is probably kind of show off. But if you could say, well, I've given this talk and this is what I said in my talk and this is why it matters, it's a totally different story, because you're giving people an opportunity to listen to your story, your content, which they couldn't because they didn't attend the talk. That's completely valid, I think. Or share a recording of your talk. But I think just having a picture, oh, look at me. At least I, and I think a lot of other people find that particularly off-putting, because it doesn't particularly tell you anything new other than that person has been at a talk and giving the talk to an audience. One last slide and I wrap up, and that is some do's and don'ts, and I just summarize what I said, I think, already. So I think sharing your perspective rather than just sharing what somebody else has already prepared for you, and really think what you think about the issue, and share that, even if it's not completely refined. You can word it in a way that it's a bit more cautious if you want, but I think sharing your own perspective, much more interesting than saying, oh, look, somebody has published a new paper. It's like, yeah, so what? But if you can say, oh, this is really interesting because, or I'm not sure I agree with X, you start engaging people much more. Serve your audience rather than promoting yourself, right? A lot of people, I think, make the mistake that they just think it's about self-promotion. And that doesn't work. Very rarely do I see posts getting a lot of traction where someone's doing self-promotion. But if you serve your audience, you think, what would they find interesting? What would I want to see if I was looking at this platform? As someone who's not posting but reading. So I think serving your audience is a good kind of focal point. And then engage meaningfully. What I see is that a lot of people will just tag all the people with lots of following. So every day I get tagged into posts and pictures, and most of the time I just ignore it unless it's clear why I'm tagged. Sometimes it's like, oh, there's a really interesting paper on this topic where you published something on it, and I know exactly why they tagged me. But a lot of the times it's just because they want me to like it or share it. It's like, well, it's annoying because I then get a notification, and most people find it annoying and off-putting. So I wouldn't do that. I've done it myself at the beginning, and it's not good. It's not good etiquette to just tag loads of people. I would take the ECI, for example, because there's a connection, right? I work there. I would tag colleagues of mine who I worked with, but random people, just because they have a lot of following, they just get basically pissed off, quite frankly, because they just get another notification that they're not interested in. I will be very selective when to respond, especially to people who are just out there to get attention. And I still make that mistake sometimes, especially when you publish something, you're kind of really proud of the work you've done, you think it's important, and somebody is just trying to throw dirt at you, right? They're saying, oh, it's nonsense, and you don't know what you're talking about. And when you look at their profile, you just see they have nothing to offer. They've never published an academic paper in their life. They know nothing about energy, yet they're there telling me that I don't know anything about the subject, which I have to spend 2 years of research on. But you have these people, right? They're just there. They want your attention. They're begging for it. And we give it to them all the time because it's not true. You shouldn't be saying that. Just ignore them or block them. I would just block them if they're rude and not engage. At the same time, there might be people you want to engage with, right? They might be critical of your work and they have credibility. And your audience will see that. So pushing back and clarifying and justifying why you've done what you've done, I think, is more appropriate in that case. Already said, blocking rude people and trolls. It's just, I think that's the best way to go about. Sometimes the question, at what point, where's the bar, right? How low does somebody have to go until you block them? I've certainly become much more ruthless, and when people start, when they start swearing, I'm immediately gone from my profile. If they start promoting, climate change is a hoax, they're gone. I don't want anyone using my timeline, my platform, to spread conspiracy theories or racism, misogynist stuff. I just block them. I just want any of that, delete their comments if I can, or hide them, and basically try to cut all connections with these people. And then finally, I think sharing other people's research is such a great thing to do, because you give other people who might not have the courage to share it or the platform to share it that opportunity. And it's a win-win-win situation, right? You, as someone who shares it, you get a perspective. You can give your own perspective on something and share that. And it's just a great feeling to push some research that you think is really important and needs to be seen. The person who has written the research benefits because they get the recognition. And then the audience also get the benefit of seeing it. And they might say, this is really great. I haven't seen this paper. And I think what you shouldn't do is just share your own work. And this goes back to self-promotion. Oh, another paper from me. Yeah, share your own work, but not just your own work, I would say. I mean, I share every single paper I publish. Of course I do. But if it's just about that, and you just have an endless stream of, look at me, this paper, this talk, I'm not sure I want to follow someone like that and engage. And so I think be mindful of that. Sharing other people's work is such a great way of, I think, countering some of the self-promotion. I think I stop here. That's been about 37 minutes of me talking, I think. And you might not have a question right now because I just stopped talking. But you might have comments as well. Please do challenge me or ask critical questions. I'm quite used to that. So please fire away with any questions or comments you might have.